Hi, it's Lauren. Welcome back to my craft room. I have an interactive card to share with you today. I'm going to be using a lot of new products from Heffy Doodle, including this 2x2 Safari stamp set and its coordinating dies, the Wild at Heart Sentiment stamp set. I have the Go Wild A2 frame die set, and I also have the Slimline Scalloped Peekaboo die set. I'm going to be using my Vertical Vines stencil and my Summer Holiday Basics paper pad from Heffy Doodle, as well as some of the colored cardstock. So let's jump right into making our background. I'm using Kiwi Crush from Heffy Doodle, and I'm going to use some repositional tape just to help me place this paper onto my Make Art station. And I'm going to use my Heffy Doodle tape to secure my stencil onto my cardstock as well as my magnets. However, I definitely regret not using pixie spray behind my stencil. There are a lot of thin parts to the stencil that move around a lot, especially when using a larger brush. So I would recommend using pixie spray, but we're going to make do with this. I used Lucky Clover Distress Oxide to stencil on those vertical vines from the stencil. So here is the reveal. I was kind of okay with it. I don't know if you saw my hand. I was like, meh, it looks all right. There's a couple areas where my stencil moved and I wasn't really thrilled, but we're going to make it work by adding splatter and no one will be the wiser. I'm going to grab my Lucky Clover in my Distress ink this time, and I added some water, and I'm using a paintbrush to splatter on that green ink. I'm going to repeat that process with my Black Soot Distress ink pad, and then again with some white ink. So splattering on that Lucky Clover green, black, and white to really add a lot of fun dimension to my background. I grabbed my A2 die and I die cut it out of some Wintergreen cardstock, and then I die cut the Go Wild sentiment out of some white cardstock and one of the yellow stripes from that Summer Holiday 6x6 paper pad. Now my interactive part of this card is going to be this Peekaboo die from that Slimline die set. So I am centering that using my frame as a guideline and some Heffy Doodle tape to keep that die in place. And I ran it through my die cut machine, and as you can see, it creates a little flap. So it die cuts only 3 sides and scores the top. So that way you can create a fold line and lift that little flap up and down and hide something inside of it. I'm going to get my Go Wild sentiment put together by gluing with my fine tip glue, the Wild, and then Go and the exclamation point onto that white background. And now we can move on to stamping the rest of our images and phrases for this card. I'm going to start by getting out my Interactively Yours stamp set from Heffy Doodle as well, and I'm going to emboss the word lift me onto my background and the bottom part of my flap. I wanted to use white embossing powder so it really stood out. This is a very teensy tiny little stamp, and I'm thinking I should have just stamped it in my Versamark in Onyx Black, but I went with it and it turned out okay. But I used Versamark and some fine detail white embossing powder and embossed it. It's kind of hard to see here, obviously, but in a close-up photo, you can see it says lift me. But it would, I think, be a little more crisp because it is such a small stamp to just stamp it in some VersaFine. So now I have cut out another A2 size piece of cardstock, this time just some white cardstock, and I'm going to stamp my inside of my flap sentiment. So I lined my 2 papers together, the green and the white, and I'm using my Misty to help me out here. And I picked a sentiment from the Wild at Heart sentiment stamp set, and then using my magnets to help me keep that white paper in place, I removed the green. And now I'm going to stamp my sentiment, which says, wishing you a roarsome birthday. And then because I used VersaFine, I'm going to let it dry. So here I am just making sure everything is going to fit together nicely. You can see the sentiment, so that's great. I'm going to put that aside, and off camera I am going to stamp and color and die cut my images. Again, I used the 2x2 Safari stamp set, and then because of the sentiment I chose, I figured I needed to add my little lion. So I used the lion from the main Squeeze Stamps and Dies, which are currently a freebie from Heffy Doodle at the time of making this video. It will eventually be released for purchase, but right now you can get this stamp set and die set for free. So I will make sure to link down the Heffy Doodle shop site down below so you can learn more about that stamp set. Okay, so let's jump ahead because I've been busy crafting while talking. I adhered that white paper with my sentiment to my card base first, and now I am adhering my vertical vine background with the flap, making sure to only add glue around my flap. So definitely not wanting to glue my flap down. I did use a rubber eraser to pick up that excess temporary adhesive that I used when I was stenciling my background. So that was just me erasing real quick some of that glue. And I'm going to add some foam adhesive behind my A2 die from the Go Wild die set. And this is a 1/4 inch wide foam adhesive from scrapbook.com. And because it's A2, it will fit perfectly on the front of my card. So I'm just trying to get it lined up as best as possible onto my card base. And you can see that little flap sticks out really nicely inside of the cut out part of this frame. And then I'm going to use that same thickness of my foam adhesive to adhere the Go Wild sentiment on top of the flap. So I'm making sure that I cut it not too wide so I don't accidentally glue my flap closed, and then figuring out where I can place those pieces so they fit nicely behind my sentiment, and then I will adhere that to my flap. So here you can see the Go Wild. I love the contrast of the yellow and white on top of all of those greens. Now my exclamation point does kind of get a little stuck, but it's not a big deal. It's easy to kind of slide, and it'll be fine if you make this card. You could probably also just lower it a little bit more and you won't run into the problem that I'm having with my sentiment. So I've already kind of laid out where I want all of my images to go, and I'm going to use some extra thin foam squares. I guess they're not called extra thin. They're just the thinner foam squares from Scrapbook Adhesives, and I'm going to adhere down my 3 critters, so my lion and my 2 toucans. I'm going to pop them up using those thinner foam squares. I didn't want to use the same thickness as the rest of my card because I didn't want my card to be super thick. So these are being adhered down just with those thinner foam squares. And then my little leaf bunches that I have next to my lion, my Go Wild sentiment, and my toucans, I'm going to use my wet glue to glue those down. So just using my same glue and some tweezers to kind of slide them under each of the images, I'm adding in those leaves. So let me get this final toucan down, and then I will glue that little bunch of leaves next to him. And then I'm going to, of course, add some bling. I'm going to grab one of my sparkle blends. I looked through my collection and found this pretty green one. It's called Show Me Your Money. I'm not sure at the time of recording if there is still some blends available. So if so, I will link it down below. But if not, I will still put the sparkle blends website down below because you can see all their different colors. There's probably another green one there for you to choose from. And then I also have a code where you could save 10% off of your purchase. So I'll have that link down below. Here is a final look at my Go Wild interactive card and the sentiment on the inside of that flap. And I can also tuck my flap behind my lion's head, as you can see, to keep that in place. Here is a final look at my card. It was also inspired by the most recent craft roulette, so I will also link that video down below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!